All right, welcome all. Thank you for participating in this week's installment of our Pause and Pivot webinar series. This series, which launched earlier this month, was created for recently laid off federal workers and other affected professionals to connect, learn, and thrive. Our mission is to provide practical resources and foster a community of practice centered on successful career transitions, essential upskilling opportunities, and leveraging available community support. Just a quick programming note, our sessions are held weekly on Wednesdays at noon. On this screen, you'll see a snippet of the next two offerings presented by faculty members who lead some of our graduate programs. I'm just going to pause a moment to allow folks to capture the QR code on screen, which will direct you to the webpage for this series. And for those of you who are curious, all of the sessions are recorded and available online through that link. Again, I'd like to welcome you to this week's webinar on trends in the labor market, presented by me, Faith Dinh. So just a quick rundown of what we'll be covering today. I will introduce myself to you and the work that I do at UMBC. We'll go over some of the tools and resources that I use in my everyday work. And then we'll get into the bulk of the content, which will cover a variety of details concerning the current landscape of the labor market. So details such as job postings, employers seeking to fill those vacancies, in-demand skills, and examples of lateral and next step jobs for folks in those fields. We'll summarize what all of this data means for you and next steps to consider. Once again, my name is Faith Dinh and I use she, her pronouns. I've been at UMBC roughly 10 years. I started in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences in July 2015, and my previous experience includes student-facing roles in admissions, enrollment management, and advising and event management. Currently, I am a manager in the Office of Program Innovation and Partnerships within the Division of Professional Studies at UMBC. The office liaises with university partners to strategically identify, develop, and execute new programs and ideas. This allows the university to be more nimble and responsive to academic and market demands. And my role covers market intelligence, curriculum management, and new program development. So some activities that I'm involved with include market research on competitive and labor landscapes, focus group and survey administration, and academic program review involving program health checks along the way, as well as annual program reviews. The work that our office does helps to ensure that the institution's programming is timely and relevant, and that holds true for both our for-credit and continuing education opportunities. So now I just want to quickly introduce some of the tools that I use to do my work. First, on the left is a software called Analyst, which is a platform by a labor market analytics company called Lightcast. Analyst allows us to use or to find comprehensive, but most importantly, objective labor market data and insights. And that helps to support initiatives like understanding the workforce landscape, discovering new opportunities, validating successful programs, optimizing existing programs by identifying and addressing skills gaps. And how Analyst works is by collecting and analyzing economic and workforce data. So that's at the federal, state, and private levels, such as job postings and career profiles. So it'll give us insights into industries, occupations, vacancies, skills, academic programs, and also the demographic of the workforce. We're able to ensure relevancy by segmenting data and homing in on specific states, counties, and even cities. This allows us to feel more comfortable that our programs are poised to connect learners with market-relevant careers. The other resource that I'll briefly mention is called EAB, formerly Education Advisory Board. EAB is a consulting firm that specializes in the education sector, and their solutions span K through 12 programming, higher education, and beyond. In the past, we've used their support for marketing, enrollment, and learner success, as well as retention. So now the reason why you're all here, we're going to cover recent labor market statistics. Just a brief disclaimer that all of this data covers February through March of this year and is specific to the DMV region. In that time frame, there were over 275,000 positions listed. Posting duration is a measure that's typically used to indicate time to fill. And so the median posting duration for this time frame was 16 days. However, that doesn't necessarily account for evergreen listings, so in reality, time to fill might be slightly higher. Of those listings, there were over 27,000 employers competing for human capital. On the right-hand side, I've listed a couple of the top companies hiring and their respective listing counts. Just to call out a few, Leidos is in the #1 spot at 2,497, Amazon at 2,257, and Booz Allen at 1,256. In terms of location, the vast percentage of all listings fell within these key cities. It's no surprise that we see DC, Richmond, and Baltimore leading, but we also have some other Virginia cities like Arlington, Alexandria, and McLean represented as well. So just a quick note here, this doesn't necessarily account for hybrid or remote work. In other words, companies may be based out of these cities, but employees may not necessarily be required to report in office at these locations. Now we'll talk about the top industries and occupations in demand and salary expectations. So the median salary, advertised salary, is just under $75,000, and the corresponding graph below that figure breaks down the specific observations. Something to consider is that not every listing advertises the salary for the given role. And the workforce data from this time suggests that the top industries include general medical and surgical hospitals, engineering services, and colleges, universities, and professional schools. More details on this data. Analyst queries the data following the North American Industry Classification System, and from the U.S. Census Bureau's website, a quote, "The North American Industry Classification System, NAICS, is the standard used by the federal statistical agencies in classifying business establishments for the purpose of collecting, analyzing, and publishing statistical data related to the U.S. business economy." In other words, this is how these industries are categorized, so they may not necessarily be obvious to the lay person. Occupations most in demand are shown here. We're always seeing a shortage of nurses, but we also see technical occupations such as software developers, project management specialists, data scientists, and the generic bucket of all other computer occupations. Again, this data is based off of federal statistical standards for classification. In this instance, the Standard Occupational Classification, or the SOC code as we affectionately call it. For clarity's sake, examples of titles that we typically see within these occupation categories include systems engineers, software engineers, project managers, and program managers. So now we'll pivot to talk about the specific skills that are being advertised in these listings. The way that Lightcast breaks these skills down is in 3 categories: specialized, common, and software. So starting with specialized skills, the figure on the left-hand side demonstrates the percentage of postings that list the respective skill as a requirement of the role, shown in navy, compared to the percentage of profiles that include that skill, shown in light blue. Immediately, we're seeing gaps in auditing, computer science, workflow management, agile methodology, and Python. On the right-hand side, each skill is listed again, along with the number of postings that include that skill as a requirement, the projected skill growth 2 years from now, and the skill growth relative to market. The skill growth relative to market that for this right column is displayed using somewhat of a stoplight color system. So green for growth, red for lagging, but interestingly enough, gray for stable. So going back to the skills called out a moment ago, auditing, computer science, agile methodology, and Python, they're all expected to grow rapidly in the next 2 years, as we can see from here. In terms of common skills, we see gaps in management, customer service, and operations, where all 3 are expected to be stable in the next 2 years. Problem solving, writing, and planning are also highly sought after, and the growth relative to market is expected to increase. Lastly, we have software skills, where we see gaps again in Python, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure, with all 3 growing rapidly by at least 24%. As time allows, I just want to go through a few examples based off the data that we saw in a previous slide listing the in-demand occupations for the DMV region. Another feature in Analyst is a module called Career Pathways, which allows you to search related professions based off of a source occupation. In this example, I searched for occupations related to registered nursing. The diagram on the left provides related roles based on skill overlap. As you can see, roles that are most related are positioned in a ring closer to the center, and those that are least related are farther out. On the right, we can see the relationship between the source occupation, nursing, and the next step or target occupation. We're given the type of move, whether it's a similar role, lateral transition, or advancement, the relevance or percentage of overlap in skills, and the salary difference. Just to note again, this is all regional data. For this example, we're going to compare the occupations of registered nurses to physician's assistants. On the left, we see some of the matching specialized skills. In Navy, we see the percentage of RN listings that list the respective skill as a requirement of the role compared to the percentage of PA postings that include that skill, shown in light blue. The diagram shows that in most instances, skills listed in job postings for registered nurses are requested at a higher rate than those of physician assistants, meaning that someone who is currently an RN possessing those skills and who may be looking to make a change in their career can more organically pivot into a PA role with minimal reskilling. Just taking a look, it looks like there's a skills gap in experience in emergency departments and with medical records, both of which are projected to grow in the next 2 years. And so that's where I would recommend that interested folks place their focus. We're given again the same output for common skills. Here we see a gap in communication and management skills. Lastly, software skills, where we see a gap in Epic EMR, clinic management systems, and patient management software, all which are expected to grow in the next 2 years by at least 9%. I'll just close out this example by emphasizing the transitional skills for registered nurses looking to step into physician assistant roles. Listed are the top specialized skills ranked by importance score for registered nurses, looking again to transition into those roles. The higher the number, the more important that skill is for the occupation. For the next example, we will take a look at roles adjacent to software developers. Let's compare software developers to computer and information research scientists. So this is a similar role with 78% relevance and a $4,800 average salary difference. For specialized skills, we see that computer and information research scientists request computer science, Python, and Amazon Web Services at a higher rate than software developers, although there is some overlap as indicated by the relevance score that I noted in the previous slide. Those skills are projected to grow rapidly in the next 2 years, at least 24%. And that's where I would recommend that interested folks place their focus. For common skills, here we see a gap in skills pertaining to communication, operations, and innovation skills. Lastly, software skills, where we again see Python, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure, all expected to grow in the next 2 years by at least 24%. And I'll close out this example by emphasizing the transitional skills for software developers looking to step into computer and information research scientist roles. Of note are natural language processing, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. In this last example, we will look at roles adjacent to project management specialists. Let's compare project management specialists to architectural and engineering managers. This is a lateral advancement, meaning that the role falls within a new occupational group, but there is a notable pay increase of over $46,000. For specialized skills, we see a lot of overlap and not much in the way of reskilling, but we'll touch more on that at the end with the transitional skills. Of note here, though, is that all but two of the skills, procurement and Microsoft Project, are projected to grow in the next 2 years. Specifically, just to call out, project management and agile methodology are expected to grow by at least 18% in the next 2 years. For common skills here, we see a gap in skills pertaining to leadership and planning. Lastly, regarding software skills, we see that JIRA is expected to grow rapidly at 24%. For project management specialists looking to step into architectural and engineering manager roles, I recommend that they place their focus on gaining skills in engineering management, new product development, and electrical engineering. What does all of this mean, and what can you do with the information now? As a representative of an institution of higher education, it behooves me to encourage folks to focus on enhancing their existing skills as well as develop new skills, whether that's through individual coursework, or credential, or certificate, or even an established program. Folks can consider enrollment in a massive open online course, MOOC, such as edX or Coursera. Additionally, I'd like to direct you to the offerings available through our certificate and degree-seeking programs at UMBC. On this slide, I've mentioned some of the relevant programs based on the skills we discussed today. So we have our MPS programs in health IT, which we get a lot of nurses in. Our MPS program in software engineering, which would be relevant for the developers, and post-baccalaureate certificate in project management. I've also included the link here to the Office of Professional Programs website, where you can access the resources and information on those programs. Alternatively, our Institute of Extended Learning delivers non-credit programming, and relevant coursework is listed here. And these are offered in a variety of modalities, self-paced, so folks can enroll and go through that at their leisure.
I'll ask a question on behalf of the folks in attendance. If someone was trying to figure out maybe how to pivot into a new industry based on general leadership or managerial experience in the federal government or as a contractor, do you have any insights on maybe where they should focus or what tools they could maybe potentially be looking into to figure out how to do?
Good question. Yep. So we do have offerings available in our Office of Professional Programs, which provides those master's degree, 30 credit master's degree programs provide both the technical skill set in whatever disciplinary field, but also management and leadership and communication courses are part of that, which I had mentioned a couple slides back. Let me see if I can get back on that. They also offer courses for folks who may be interested in the PMP of some sort or other management offerings. I would say too that the Career Center at UMBC is supporting, as far as I'm aware, alumni, especially those that have been affected by the recent layoffs, and so they would be a great resource to start. They do have programming. In addition to their resources, they have programming and have supported both students and alumni with mock interviews, resume prep, things like that.
Great. I guess another question. I got a couple, so if folks would rather just have me field them, we can do that. Based on what you've seen, has there been like a change in demand for remote or hybrid positions? Has that increase, decrease, stabilized over like the last year? And do you think there's any implications with those trends?
That is a good question. I have not noticed that. There are additional filters that are available in Analyst to narrow down to roles that specifically call out to hybrid or remote. For the purposes of pulling the data for this webinar, I kind of left things a bit more generic. So I do not have that information off the top of my head.
I appreciate it. See, there was a question about connection. Hopefully everyone can hear us. If you can't, please let us know in the chat and I'll see if there's anything I can troubleshoot to assist with that. Another question, because we've got maybe five or so minutes here. Are there any significant shifts or trends in the DMV market that you think someone who's coming into the current job market should be maybe hyper focused on or spending most of their time looking into?
Yeah. And so I think now is a really interesting an overwhelming time. And as we're hearing, and so I hate to be the broken record that repeats it, but AI is something that's really become at the forefront and that I would recommend folks look into. Where, as we had seen in previous slides, that was something generative AI and artificial intelligence in general was something that's quite big and in demand.
Mhm. Yeah. And I appreciated there was a slide that was kind of dedicated to in-demand skills. And I think the slide deck will come out at the end of this session. So you'll all be able to go through that kind of drop list. Oh, there it goes. Feel free to screenshot that, but you will get a email with all of these slides. But I think compiling this list along with generative AI could be a great place for folks to start. Let's take a look at the chat, see if any questions came in. Awesome. All right, we do have a question here. For programming languages like Python, are those growth projections factoring in growth in use of AI code, or is AI being considered in some of these projections?
Thanks for the question, Chris. That is something that we would need to take a closer look at the specific listings in Analyst, and that's something that I am happy to follow up with after the session and get a little bit more information from our account rep in terms of how Analyst is querying this data and distilling it. I would imagine that is accounting for AI, but I don't want to share information that I don't have.
Yeah,
Incorrect information.
appreciate that. It's a great question. Thank you. If anyone else has a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. All right, last question here before we get to the exit survey. Are there any surprises in the job market based on your experience and your expertise as a professional in this industry? Are there any surprises that you think folks should be aware of or considering that they might not be privy to or see just looking at surface data?
Yeah, and in some of this too, just a disclaimer, the data that I've been looking at covers the entire DMV region. Virginia does throw things a little bit, and that's where I was surprised that we had seen a lot of, and we try to pop back to that slide, we had seen a lot of companies that were hiring out of places like Virginia Beach, and where is that? And Norfolk. That was pretty interesting. And the other thing is that what this does not include is data or jobs that are related to staffing agencies. So companies that are using another source to facilitate their hires. And I've taken some of that data out, and tried to make this as relevant as possible. So some of that data in terms of location and the specific companies that we're hiring was surprising to me. Something that seems a little random, but is a surprise, but is also not a surprise, is that there's always a shortage of nurses. That's always something that comes up. Makes sense for this region, and it makes sense given COVID and everything like that, but I'm not sure how relevant it may be to our attendees.
I see. Well, I appreciate that insight. Thank you so much, Faith, for taking the time to speak to the folks in our community who can benefit from this information. I see you've got your contact information there as well. If folks take a look in the chat, there's an exit survey. Please take just the 2 minutes it takes to fill that out. We want to make sure that the webinars that we are hosting are relevant to the needs of the impacted federal workers and contractors, and make sure that what we're doing here is a benefit or a resource to our community. So I will give the stage back to Faith and let you have the last word.
Thank you. Yep. So just want to thank you for your participation in today's webinar. My contact information is listed on this slide should you be interested in reaching out. And we hope to see many of you next week. Again, the QR code, I'll just flash back up on the screen for the Pause and Pivot webinar for folks that may be interested in signing up for next week's session. Otherwise, thank you again for your time, and we will see you next week.